shadow of Mount Ararat looms heavily over the rural landscape of Victoria, Australia, casting a pall over the sprawling complex known as Aradale. Perched upon a hill like a sleeping beast, the asylum is a place constructed of brick and mortar, but held together by the sorrow of thousands. The wind here does not merely blow, it whispers the names of those who entered these gates never to return. Visitors claim that the air grows colder the moment one steps onto the grounds of this massive estate. It is a cold that seeps through heavy coats and settles deep into the marrow of the bone, warning the living that they are trespassing. This is not just a building, it is a monument to a misunderstood era of medical history, where the cure was often far worse than the madness itself. Construction of this colossal facility began in the 1860s, during the height of the Victorian gold rush. It was a time of immense wealth and optimism. Yet, it was also a time of deep societal shame regarding the mentally ill. The government sought to build a facility that would house the growing number of people deemed unfit for polite society. They designed a city within a city, a self-contained world where the unwanted could be hidden away from the public eye. The architecture is grand and imposing, featuring Italianate towers and high arched windows that look out blindly across the countryside. However, the grandeur was merely a mask for the suffering that would soon fill every corridor and every room of the institution. When the asylum opened its doors in 1867, it was intended to be a place of refuge and healing for the troubled souls of the colony. Yet the definition of lunacy in the 19th century was a broad and dangerous net that ensnared many who did not belong there. People were committed for conditions that today would be treated with therapy or medication, such as depression or anxiety. Others were locked away simply for having epilepsy or for suffering the lingering effects of a stroke. The saddest cases were often women who were admitted for postnatal depression or for simply being inconvenient to their husbands. Once the heavy iron gates slammed shut behind them, their identities were stripped away, and they became mere numbers in a cruel system. The sheer scale of Aradale is difficult to comprehend for those who have not walked its silent halls. At its peak, the asylum housed nearly 1,000 patients at a time and employed hundreds of staff members. It functioned as a completely autonomous village with its own market gardens, orchards, livestock, and workshops. This self-sufficiency was born of necessity, but it also served to further isolate the inhabitants from the outside world. The high walls and the ha-ha walls, which were sunken fences designed to look invisible from a distance, ensured that escape was nearly impossible. For over 130 years, this place was a fortress of solitude, where the screams of the tormented were swallowed by the thick brick walls. One of the most chilling features of the asylum is the architectural design that separated the male and female patients. A bridge known as the Bridge of Sighs connected the two wings, yet it served as a barrier rather than a path. It was named after the famous bridge in Venice, where prisoners would catch their last glimpse of the outside world before imprisonment. For the patients at Aradale, crossing this bridge often meant they were moving to a more secure or severe ward. The bridge stands today as a silent witness to the despair of countless souls who walked across its wooden planks, knowing they might never feel the touch of a loved one again. Within the complex lies a separate and even more foreboding structure known as J Ward. Originally built as a goldfields prison, it was later incorporated into the asylum to house the criminally insane. These were not just ordinary patients, they were murderers and violent offenders who were deemed too mad for regular prison. The stone walls of J Ward are thick and cold, absorbing the rage and madness of the men who were chained within. It is here that the atmosphere becomes heavy, with a sense of threat that feels almost physical. Visitors often report feeling a tightness in their chest or a sudden wave of nausea as they cross the threshold into this prison of the mind. Life inside J Ward was a brutal existence, governed by strict rules and harsh punishments. The cells were small and damp, with little light penetrating the gloom. Men were often kept in isolation for days or weeks at a time, driving them further into the depths of their insanity. The governors of the ward were tasked with maintaining order among the most dangerous men in Australia, and they did so with an iron fist. One such figure was Governor Gary Webb, whose reputation for discipline was well known. Even in death, it is said that Governor Webb still patrols the corridors, ensuring that the inmates remain in their cells, and that visitors show the proper respect. Among the notorious inmates of J Ward was a man named Bill Wallace, who holds the record for the longest serving patient. Bill lived within these walls for over 60 years, entering as a young man and dying as an old one, having never seen freedom again. He was committed after shooting a man in a dispute, yet he never stood trial for the crime due to his mental state. Bill was a chess master and a quiet figure, yet his presence is still felt in the day room where he spent decades of his life. Some say they can still smell the tobacco from his pipe, or hear the soft clatter of chess pieces moving across a board in the empty room. The treatment methods employed at Aradale throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries were barbaric by modern standards. In the early days, doctors believed that mental illness was caused by inflammation of the brain or an excess of blood. To cure this, they would use leeches to bleed the patients or submerge them in freezing cold baths for hours. These water treatments were intended to shock the system and calm the agitated mind. But in reality, they were a form of torture. Patients would be restrained in canvas sheets and dunked repeatedly until they were blue with cold and gasping for air. As medical science progressed, new treatments were introduced that were hailed as miracles, but were often just as destructive. In the mid-20th century, the use of insulin shock therapy became common practice within the hospital wards. Patients were injected with massive doses of insulin to induce a coma, which doctors believed would reset the brain. This dangerous procedure often resulted in permanent brain damage or death, yet it was performed routinely. The echoes of these procedures seem to linger in the treatment rooms, where visitors often report sudden migraines or a metallic taste in their mouths. Perhaps the most infamous of all treatments performed at Aradale was the transorbital lobotomy. This gruesome procedure involved inserting a sharp instrument into the brain through the eye socket to sever connections in the prefrontal cortex. It was a quick surgery that could be performed in minutes, but the results were irreversible and often catastrophic. The personality of the patient was often wiped clean, leaving them as empty shells devoid of emotion or spark. The room where these surgeries took place is widely considered to be one of the most haunted areas of the entire complex, with a heavy, oppressive energy. Electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, was another staple of psychiatric care during the middle of the 20th century. While still used today in a modified form, the early versions were administered without muscle relaxants or anesthesia. Patients were strapped to tables and subjected to high voltage shocks that caused violent seizures strong enough to break bones. The fear that permeated the wards on treatment days was palpable as patients waited for their turn on the table. It is said that the screams of those undergoing ECT can still be heard echoing down the long, empty corridors late at night. Death was a constant companion at Aradale Lunatic Asylum throughout its long and dark history. It is estimated that over 13,000 people died within the confines of the institution during its 130 years of operation. This staggering number includes those who died of old age, those who succumbed to illness, and those who took their own lives. The sheer volume of death has left a permanent psychic scar on the land, creating a reservoir of sorrow that fuels the paranormal activity. The spirits of the departed seem unable to leave the place where they spent their final agonizing days. The bodies of the deceased were not always treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. Many were buried in paupers' graves in the adjacent cemetery, with nothing more than a small numbered marker to identify them. The families of the patients often abandoned them in life and refused to claim them in death, leaving the asylum to dispose of the remains. It is a field of forgotten souls, a place where the grass grows long over the resting places of people who were erased from history. Walking through the cemetery one feels the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions and unfinished lives. One of the most active locations for paranormal encounters is the old morgue, where the bodies were stored before burial. The room is small and cold, with a porcelain slab that served as the final resting place for thousands of patients. Visitors who enter the morgue often report feeling an intense wave of sadness or a sensation of being touched by cold hands. Some have even captured photographs of strange mists or shadow figures standing near the slab. It is as if the spirits are still waiting for someone to come and claim them to acknowledge their existence one last time. The legends of Aradale are not just about the patients, but also about the staff who lived and worked there. One of the most famous recurring spirits is that of a nurse known as Nurse Kerry. According to local lore, she was a dedicated nurse who worked in the women's wards and was deeply protective of her charges. Visitors to the women's wing often report seeing a figure in a period nursing uniform watching them from the doorways. She is said to be a benevolent spirit, often appearing to warn people away from dangerous areas or to comfort those who feel overwhelmed. However, not all the spirits at Aradale are as gentle as Nurse Kerry is rumored to be. In the men's wards, there are reports of a much darker entity that seems to resent the presence of the living. This shadow figure is often described as tall and imposing, blocking out the light as it moves through the hallways. People who encounter this entity often feel a sudden onset of dread and an instinctual urge to run. It is believed that this could be the spirit of a former guard or a violent patient who retains his aggression even in the afterlife. The phenomenon of cold spots is incredibly common throughout the asylum, defying all logical explanation. On a sweltering Australian summer day, visitors will suddenly walk into a pocket of air that is freezing cold. These spots move and shift, seemingly with a will of their own, tracking people as they move through the rooms. Skeptics try to explain this away as drafts or poor insulation, but the specific, localized nature of the cold suggests otherwise. It is a chill that feels unnatural, a void of heat that suggests the presence of something drawing energy from the environment. Another prominent spirit is that of a patient known as Old Margaret, who spent decades in the asylum. Margaret was known in life for being territorial and grumpy, and in death, she seems to have changed very little. She is said to haunt the area where her room once was, often telling visitors to get out or leave her alone. Electronic voice phenomena recordings captured in her wing often feature a raspy female voice demanding solitude. It is a poignant reminder that for some, Aradale was the only home they knew, and they are still defending their small corner of it. The music room was once a place of rare joy for the patients, where they could listen to piano music or sing. Today it is a place of eerie silence, that is occasionally broken by inexplicable sounds. Guides and visitors have reported hearing the faint tinkling of piano keys when no one is in the room. It is a disjointed melody, a fragment of a song from a bygone era, playing on an instrument that no longer exists. This phantom music is perhaps a memory etched into the walls, a playback of the few moments of happiness that occurred in this bleak place. Sense of smell is often linked to memory, and at Aradale, phantom smells are a frequent occurrence. The scent of lavender water often wafts through the women's wards, despite there being no flowers nearby. In the men's wards, the acrid smell of stale tobacco smoke is often detected, even though smoking has been banned for decades. More disturbing is the occasional smell of rotting meat or sulfur that manifests in the more oppressive areas of the hospital. These olfactory hallucinations serve to immerse the visitor in the history of the building, pulling them back in time. The administration block stands at the front of the complex, representing the bureaucratic authority that governed the asylum. It was here that the decisions were made regarding the lives and fates of the patients. The offices are now empty and dusty, but the feeling of being judged remains strong in these rooms. Papers and files were once shuffled here, stamping out the freedom of individuals with a callous bureaucratic efficiency. Some say they can hear the sound of typing or the rustling of paper when the building is silent. Beneath the asylum lies a network of tunnels that were used to transport laundry, food, and sometimes bodies. These subterranean passages are dark, cramped, and utterly terrifying to traverse. The staff used these tunnels to move deceased patients to the morgue so that other patients would not be upset by the sight of a body. It is in these tunnels that many visitors feel the most vulnerable, as there is no way to escape the crushing darkness. The air is thick and still, and the feeling of being followed is almost constant. The shadow people of Aradale are a phenomenon that has been witnessed by countless visitors and ghost hunters. These are not merely vague shapes, but distinct three-dimensional silhouettes that move independently of any light source. They are often seen darting into rooms or peeking around corners, observing the living with a silent intensity. Unlike traditional ghosts, which may retain human features, shadow people are devoid of detail, appearing as voids in reality. Their presence is usually accompanied by a feeling of intense static electricity and hair standing on end. In 1993, the Aradale Lunatic Asylum was finally closed down as part of a move towards deinstitutionalization. The remaining patients were transferred to smaller community-based care facilities or released. The massive complex was left abandoned, its doors locked, and its windows boarded up against the elements. For several years, it stood empty, a silent giant on the hill, gathering dust and rumors. The closure marked the end of an era, but it was not the end of the story for the building or its spectral inhabitants. After its closure, the site became a target for vandals and thrill seekers who would break in to explore the haunted halls. They told stories of slamming doors, disembodied voices, and terrifying encounters in the dark. These illicit visits only fueled the legend of Aradale, cementing its reputation as one of the most haunted places in Australia. The local community was divided, with some wanting the building demolished to erase the painful history, and others wanting it preserved. Eventually, the historical significance of the site saved it from the wrecking ball. Today, Aradale is open to the public for historical tour and ghost tour, allowing brave souls to explore its mysteries. The tour takes visitors through the wards, the treatment rooms, the chapel, and the morgue. It is during these tours that many of the most compelling accounts of paranormal activity are recorded. People who claim to be skeptics often leave the asylum visibly shaken, unable to explain what they have experienced. The guides themselves have a wealth of stories about things they have seen when they thought they were alone. One frequent occurrence on the tour is the phenomenon of visitors fainting or becoming suddenly ill. This usually happens in specific areas, such as the men's wing or the infirmary. People will be standing and listening to the guide one moment, and then collapse to the floor the next. They often describe a feeling of being drained of energy or of a heavy weight pressing down on their chest. It happens with such regularity that the guides are trained to watch for the signs of a guest about to go down. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVP sessions conducted at Aradale, have yielded chilling results. Investigators ask questions into the silence, and later, upon reviewing the audio, they hear clear responses. Voices have been recorded saying names, asking for help, or telling the living to leave. Some of the voices are childlike and confused, while others are angry and guttural. These recordings provide compelling evidence that there are intelligences remaining in the building that are trying to communicate. Physical attacks, although rare, have been reported by visitors who have ventured into the darker corners of the asylum. People have emerged from the men's wards with unexplained scratches on their arms or backs. Others have reported feeling a sharp tug on their hair or a shove from invisible hands. These physical interactions suggest that some of the entities at Aradale possess enough energy to affect the physical world. It is a terrifying realization that the ghosts here can do more than just scare, they can hurt. The dining halls, where hundreds of patients once ate their meals in silence, are now vast, empty caverns. The noise of cutlery hitting tin plates once filled these rooms, a cacophony of institutional feeding. Now the silence is deafening, yet some say they can hear the faint hum of conversation. It is a residual haunting, a replay of the energy expended by thousands of people gathering in one place day after day. The energy of the routine, seems to have imprinted itself onto the very fabric of the building. The isolation cells are perhaps the most disturbing of all the rooms in the asylum. These small, windowless boxes were used to contain patients who were deemed a danger to themselves or others. The walls are covered in scratch marks and graffiti left by desperate souls trying to leave a mark on the world. Standing inside one of these cells, with the heavy door closed, is an experience in pure terror. One can almost feel the panic and the claustrophobia of the person who was locked inside for days on end. Despite the horror and the tragedy, there is a strange beauty to the decay of Aradale. The peeling paint reveals layers of color that tell the story of changing times and tastes. The sunlight streaming through the dusty windows creates a cathedral-like atmosphere in the upper wards. It is a juxtaposition of beauty and suffering, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there is light. Photographers flock to the site to capture this eerie aesthetic, freezing the decay in time. The question of why the spirits remain at Aradale is one that haunts paranormal investigators. Is it because of the trauma they suffered in life, binding them to the location of their pain? Or is it because they simply have nowhere else to go, having been abandoned by the world in life and death? Perhaps they do not know they are dead, trapped in a loop of their daily routine. Whatever the reason, their presence is undeniable, turning the asylum into a crowded house of the dead. The town of Ararat has a complex relationship with the asylum that overlooks it. For decades, it was the main employer in the town and a source of economic stability. Yet it was also a place of secrets and shame, a shadow that touched everyone in the community. Many locals have relatives who worked there or were patients there, creating a deep personal connection. The ghosts of Aradale are not just strangers, they are the ancestors and the neighbors of the people living below. As night falls over the asylum, the atmosphere shifts from historical curiosity to primal fear. The shadows lengthen, and the building seems to come alive with the sounds of the night. It is in the darkness that the true nature of Aradale reveals itself. It is a place where the veil between the living and the dead is dangerously thin. The skeptics may laugh during the day, but few are willing to walk these halls alone after the sun has set. Aradale Lunatic Asylum stands as a testament to the failures of the past and the enduring power of the human spirit. It is a place where madness and cruelty reigned for over a century, leaving a stain that cannot be washed away. The ghosts that walk these halls are the reminders of those we tried to forget, the inconvenient people who were locked away. They demand to be seen, they demand to be heard, and they will not be silenced by the passage of time. For those who dare to visit Aradale, the experience is one that will linger long after they have left the grounds. It is a journey into the heart of darkness, a confrontation with the reality of mental illness and institutional abuse. The eyes that watch from the shadows are not just figments of the imagination. They are the witnesses to history. And as you drive away from the imposing brick complex, you may catch a glimpse of a face in the window, watching you go, ensuring that you take the story of Aradale with you.